and welcome to the Geek Legion of Doom, ready for a different type of video. So a little while ago I put on the the comments on the community section, essentially ask me my top 3 of anything. Now, so I'm going to answer my top 3 of the comments that I got, and I'm going to, if you want to do this as a a tag video, feel free. So, you know, obviously if anyone else wants to do this as a little bit of a fun idea here, it's up to you. So yeah, so I asked asked me the top 3. It could have been literally anything. It doesn't have to be about films. It could be about anything. They're mostly about films, to be honest, but I didn't put any actual limits on it. So let's just go through. So the first person to ask me was someone who's got a very unusual name to pronounce. I'm probably going to butcher, so I do apologise. Gagnashdiak. There you go. So I probably won't pronounce that again. And he asked, he or she asked a number of ones. So the first one: what are your top 3 weirdest films? Now, as a rule, I generally don't like weird, surreal films, to be honest with you. I like to have, you know, an intelligent or at least fun storyline with realistic characters that you can root behind. So I'm not a huge fan of the weird or the surreal. That being said, there's certainly some films that I would consider weird or a little bizarre that I do enjoy. First one I would say is Urusaka Doji, or Legend of the Overthing. At least that is the UK title of this Japanese anime. And I say this one because this was one of the first adult animated movies that I'd ever seen. When this came out, which probably was I would say probably late 90s, mid to late 90s. This came out on VHS. I bought it because it had a cool looking demon on the cover, you know, but I'd never seen an 18 rated cartoon at that point. Putting it in, not realising what it was, and to be seen, if you're not familiar, it's basically lots of tent monsters raping women and tentacles going places. So I watched that, and I was relatively young when that came out, and my mum was there, and I was thinking, bloody hell, you know, I wasn't expecting that. Certainly, I would say on the weird side, and I think Japan seems odd. Anyway, so there was that one. Number 2, I would say, is UHF, which is a a parody movie. And this one stars Weird Al Yankovic, and it essentially does have a story. It's about this guy who's trying to do this TV channel, and they have all these weird little programs in there called Conan the Librarian, sorry. And there's a Gandhi 2, these little movie sketches and stuff, which are quite funny, I have to say, like a Rambo one. So if you haven't seen it, UHF, I mean, the actual story itself is meh, but it has these little skits in it, which is it's quite funny. And the number 1 I would say was Meet the Feebles, which is an early Peter Jackson movie. And this is essentially like the Muppets, but they basically do everything adult to the extremes: drugs, sex, violence, adultery. It's all there with these Muppets, or Muppet you know, creations and things like this. So again, it's a somewhat of a weird viewing experience. So they're my what I would consider my top 3. Now you might be expecting, you know, the likes of Doctor Strangelove or like Eraserhead, but I don't really like those films. I know they're weird. I know they are well received, but they're just not for me. Those ones I did enjoy to a degree, or at least they were memorable in case of Urusaka Doji. Anyway, so next one was my top 3 underappreciated films. Now, I would say this. So, first one I would say is The Borderlands. Now, this one I feel does have a bit of a cult following, because I think when people see it, people you know, shout about it. I've seen other channels watch this movie and then go, no, definitely recommend this. But it's not one I would say genuinely a lot of people have heard about. You know, if you're maybe outside of the the community, so to speak. So The Borderlands, also known as Final Prayer, is a found footage movie. Very scary, very kind of well done, genuinely kind of a creepy movie. Next one was a B movie I saw, relatively recent actually, called Big Freaking Rats. And I just thought it was loads of fun. And it's one of these, I think, there's so many kind of low budget movies now that kind of come out and kind of just fly under the radar and kind of get, you know, mixed in with the kind of the rest of them. This one kind of me stood out as being a real schlocky, fun film, and it has some great comedy moments in it as well. But if I had to say what I think is a truly underappreciated film, genuinely underappreciated, then I would say the movie 84 Charlie Mopic. Now, a lot of you probably haven't heard of this film, now this was one of the first found footage movies, but it gets completely overlooked because it's not a horror film. It's actually a Vietnam War movie, but it is a found footage movie, and it was done really before, you know, obviously before the kind of the Blair Witch. I believe it was the same year as, I think it was some UFO one, which I can't remember the name of it now. And I know there was like Cannibal Holocaust preceded this one, but this really is one of the kind of the early ones, and in Vietnam films as well. It's one of these movies that kind of gets forgotten about in the conversation. People always talk Full Metal Jacket, Platoon, but a lot of comments I've seen about this movie are from actual Vietnam veterans, so this is kind of the most realistic take on it, and it is, as I say, a very early example of found footage movies, and it's one of the few examples of that style which is not a horror movie, although arguably you could say the horrors of war, you know. But yeah, it's definitely underappreciated, and for example, Aaran at Screenstars was a big found footage movie. I recommended it to him because, you know, he was a found footage fan, hadn't seen it. So if you like found footage movies, check this one out. Next one is movies from the Asylum. Now I'm assuming this is at the company of the Asylum rather than movies that takes place in an asylum. Now it's difficult to remember because there's only really one Asylum movie that I genuinely liked. So I was kind of thinking, okay, so what other ones did I not hate? Basically, to kind of put in this kind of like this top three. The first one I genuinely like. But the other two I think I still enjoyed to a certain degree, but you know, I'm kind of like scraping the barrel a little bit with this top three, to be fair. But I would say at number three, The Bell Witch Haunting, which is again a found footage style movie, that takes, you know, it's a modern movie that takes place on the supposed same area where the legend of this Bell Witch, which is a real, you know, quote unquote real American haunting, that is, you know, adapted for the Asylum to do this kind of found footage movies. Asylum are notoriously cheap, but I think you can get away with it a little bit more in a found footage scenario. And then number two is Battle Dogs, which is kind of like a werewolf movie, like a werewolf action movie that kind of takes place primarily at this kind of airport. Yeah, it's not a good movie, but it's still kind of fun. But my number one, and this is a movie I genuinely do like, is one called Ghost Hunters, and this is directed by a guy called Perry Reginald Teo, who is a budget version of James Wan. His directorial style reminds me a lot of James Wan, his kind of dark styling, and he's done a few films that I've quite enjoyed. This one was a mockbuster to the 2016 Ghostbusters, the female remix. This came out to kind of try and capitalise on this, but it's not a jokey film. It's kind of like, I mean, it's schlocky, but not jokey. And it's like, what if Ghostbusters were a genuine horror film, that kind of thing. I quite enjoyed it, I have to say. Next one is my top three shark movies. I would say Deep Blue Sea is probably my third, because it's a fun, big budget movie that, you know, you can enjoy. It's one I've watched a few times. So I do think it has a rewatchability factor that maybe something like, for example, The Reef, which I would consider is probably critically better, but if it's just my favourite, then I think I would say Deep Blue Sea. Number two is 47 Meters Down, the original movie, and I said in that review, and I stick by it to this point, it is the best shark movie since Jaws. And to me, that was a masterclass in creating tension. The second one, not so good. But the first one I thought was excellent. And that leaves obviously number one being Jaws. Still to date, the original and best shark movie out there. Animals I'd like to see in a creature feature. So my top 3 animals that I would like to see in a creature feature. This was a tough list because obviously there's been a lot of creature features involving animals. So it's like, what animals that haven't been done could I say? So let me go through. One of these is a little cheek that how they have. There's not been a specific film about it, but they have turned up in some films. Number 3 is a Mosasaurus, which was the kind of the you would have seen it in Jurassic World. It was the kind of the aquatic-based dinosaur there. You know, huge sea monster. I'd love to see a creature feature that deals with something like that. I believe if they continue to make the Meg films, I believe there might be one turning up in that. I don't know. And then was a low-budget movie called Predator X, which kind of had a similar creature. But it was not quite this. So yeah, a Mosasaurus would be a great creature feature. I would love to see a decent kind of like you know, seafaring creature feature like that. Actually, all of my 3 are all water-based creatures. Number 2, here's one you probably haven't heard of. A kangaroo, which is a very small catfish. Now, why would I make that as a creature feature? Well, this is also known as the penis fish, because these are the ones that swim up your urine while you're having a pee and go into your wang and cause problems. That to me is a great pitch for a movie. You know, these things could swim in your knobber and make you some type of zombie or something. You know, you just basically have people acting weird, so it's not even big budget. There you go. You can have that idea free at YouTube. But my number 1 would be some type of mutant anglerfish, because those things are scary. These are nightmare fuel. What you see in like the abyss and down the bottom of the kind of the Mariana Trench and things like this. You know, there's any number of scary looking kind of like deep sea creatures, but the anglerfish always strikes me as one which is you know, particularly kind of scary looking. And again, we've seen it in a couple of turn up in a couple of films. I think even one of the Nemo films might have had one, but a film based on like a kind of like a giant version or something would be cool. My next top 3 would be my favourite foreign movies. Now, I'm in the UK, so technically speaking, American films are foreign to me, but I'm not going to cheat and say that, so I will say non-English language movies, because I'm assuming that's probably what you meant. My number 3 would be The Raid, and I couldn't decide whether to put The Raid or The Raid 2, to be honest, but I think maybe The Raid, because it was the first one. I think it was a great action movie. Number 2 is Gonjiam Haunted Asylum, and this is a Korean found footage movie that takes place in this apparently true haunted asylum. It's an abandoned asylum which really exists in Korea, and there's this big kind of like thing there that once you go in there you don't come out, and it was genuinely scary, pretty decent. And I quite like haunted asylum movies. My number 1 pick though is a French movie called Brotherhood of the Wolf. That's the English title, and this was a kind of a period fantasy action movie / horror. It stars Mark Dacascos, and is essentially based on a true story about this kind of creature which turned out to be a wolf, I think. But here it's kind of like this big, like massive wolf that has this kind of like cult behind it as well, and it killed a bunch of people, and it was a whole big mystery. It's kind of an early version of where like werewolf legends comes from. So that was quite good. Yeah, so that's my 3 foreign movies. Next one is movies that I like but are outdated, so ones that haven't aged well, maybe could do better now. This was quite a fun one for me, this list. Number 3, I would say Street Fighter, because that was made, I think, before film studios would take a chance on making a violent, genuinely kind of violent movie. And Street Fighter, so I used to work in the game industry when Street Fighter 2 was at its peak. And you know, it was huge, but the market's expanded so much now, and you could make a genuine kind of like combat game, you know, movie based on the game, and not have the kind of like the campy, schlocky one that I thought at the time film studios thought they had to make it this kind of like rainbow-coloured, fun, family movie. But I think nowadays, you know, there's a lot more of mature storytelling, and that like R-rated movies that are kind of that are done well, and even ones which are still like the PG-13, like the recent Mortal Kombat, they still push the envelope a little bit more and take it a bit more seriously. So I think that kind of like that movie was outdated. Number 2 would be Weird Science. And I love Weird Science. It is one of my favourite all-time films, one of my top 10 films of all time. But it is definitely a 80s movie, and you know, it's one of the kind of like the thing that like a time capsule that encapsulates that period. But I do think there are obviously, you know, it is somewhat of a product of its time, and kind of like the some of the stuff you simply couldn't get away with now. I mean, unlike say Street Fighter, which I think was new to at the time. This one you had like an adult woman canoodling with 15-year-old boys, and the actress was genuinely older, and the actors were genuinely 15, and you know, they were kind of kissing and stuff, and obviously you couldn't do that now. There was talk of a remake. Now I'm not against remakes because I still have the original, so I'm curious to see what another take would be. I believe they were going to gender swap it, so it would be 2 girls making a guy and everything, but I do feel like, as much as I love Weird Science, it is a little bit outdated. But my number 1 pick, and this is one film where I'm crying out for a remake, is The Last Starfighter. I genuinely would like to see, so I'm kind of like nonplussed about it, but I would genuinely like to see a Last Starfighter remake, because the technology has got so much better and different since this movie came out. So if you're unfamiliar, it's about this guy who plays like arcade games, and it turns out one of these arcade games was actually a training tool for this real kind of galactic war. Now, arcade games aren't really a thing now, but you've got, you know, online gaming, which could obviously be modernised. Plus, this is one of the first movies to use predominantly CGI in its effects, and they look bad. They look bad, and again, so that could definitely be doing an updating. Anyway, the next top 3, Cynthia Zeiden asks, what is my top 3 Italian horror movies? So specifically horror, otherwise Star Crash would have been in there somewhere. But I would say, I'm going to give you the English names rather than try and pronounce the Italian names. But I would say Demons is a you know, a nice gooey, gory classic. Followed by Burial Ground, which was a zombie movie that's kind of lesser known to a degree. This has got like about 1 million different names. Burial Ground, Nights of Terror, and it's a lot of people don't like this stuff, but I don't. It's these ancient zombies that I kind of quite like. I think the Italians did ancient zombies best, which leads me into my number 1 pick, Zombie Flesh Eaters. Zombie 2, as it's known elsewhere. You know, zombie versus shark scene. What else do you need to say? But this film is just endlessly watchable, you know, outside of that. And again, ancient zombies, I love them. And it was just a genuinely unsettling movie, that one. Screenstars asks, what are my top 3 most valuable items in my collection? This is a difficult one because I don't honestly know the value of some of the goods that I own. So I've kind of just gone for ones that I know are reasonably valuable. but there are some kind of box sets and stuff which I don't really know. But these ones I think probably would definitely be, you know, one of the top threes. The first one, it would be the Iron Man Future Shop Steelbook. So this was one of the first Blu-ray steelbooks that kind of came out, and this was like a Canadian steelbook for the original Iron Man, and yeah, it's because it was like one of the first ones that kind of came out. Not loads were made, but this one is one of those ones which has depreciated in value because people have moved on to things like premium steelbooks, like your Blue Founds and stuff like this. This one used to go for literally hundreds of pounds, but nowadays you can kind of, I mean, I didn't pay that for this, to be honest with you, but you can pick it up for sometimes less than £100, which is, considering this as considered one of the rarest Blu-ray steelbooks ever. You know, you can see that the valuations here are a little bit kind of move around a little bit. And actually is similar to this one as well, which is also one of the kind of considered the rarest Blu-ray steelbooks. This is the German John Rambo steelbook, and this one comes with a tattoo. Now this was pulled off the shelf, so it was put out in Germany and then taken off sale because the movie wasn't actually rated. So it was kind of released without kind of being rated, so they had to take it off shelf, and then it was reissued with a kind of like a different steelbook. So that is why this one is so scarce, and it kind of goes again. This one goes for sometimes upwards of a couple of £100. Again, I didn't pay that for this one. I managed to get this one for what would be considered really a bargain price for it. And so these things, again, the value kind of bobs them up and down a little bit because people move on to the next thing. But what I would consider probably the most expensive thing that I got this for £35, by the way, was this Elektra Film Arena premium steelbook, and this was only limited to 300, and so because it was so low, and this wasn't one of the ones where they had loads of different covers, that was the version they did, that was it. So 300, and that was it. So there wasn't other versions of this that you could get. It was just limited to 300. So this one, to get you on eBay now, you'd probably be looking £200 plus, to be honest with you, certainly for a sealed copy like that one. So that probably is the most valuable singular item that I own. There are some box sets and other kind of steelbooks that are a little bit more, you know, that are kind of a similar kind of price, if that makes sense. But I would say those three are, if you know, probably the top three. Right. Professional Amateur Hour asks, what are my top 3 movies that I can re-watch? So these ones I can watch multiple times and kind of not get bored. So in reverse order, I would say the original Star Wars. Now, I know people call this A New Hope. To me, this is Star Wars. I'm of the generation where this was just called Star Wars, and that's how I refer to it. But that original Star Wars I have watched probably 100 times in my life. It's one of those films where, you know, there's a couple of boring bits at the beginning, I won't lie, but you know, it's such a great film, and I used to be able to, you know, just watch it day after day after day when I was a kid. Number 2 is a film I've already mentioned, that's Weird Science. It's actually my favourite comedy movie, even though I don't find this one of the funniest comedy. It's my favourite comedy purely because I like the characters and I like the story, and there's so many like funny things that, you know, and fun things that happen in it, rather than it being a funny movie that makes me laugh. It's just a fun movie to watch. Number 1 though is Fright Night, which is actually my favourite movie of all time, and I find this movie very, very rewatchable purely because I just love the atmosphere and that it creates, and the kind of the characters that inhabit this kind of world. And the final one is my top 3 horror directors. Now this was a difficult one because I'm maybe a little bit of a what people won't expect me to say this. I genuinely don't have favourite directors. There's no director that I like all of their work, so I genuinely don't care who directs it a lot of the time. You know, there's certain directors who I think have a particular kind of style, but I don't necessarily always like their films. Like Tarantino is a great director, but I don't always, I mean, some of his films I haven't even seen. But it's just like, so I don't have any sort of favourite directors. So this is a difficult one for me because there genuinely isn't a director that I follow. I just don't care as much, to be honest. But I will say there's 3 that I would say I genuinely like the majority of their stuff, but there are still movies here that I haven't seen or don't want, don't like. So number 3 is Peter Jackson. These days more well known for his Lord of the Rings movies, and I have taken this because I do like those films, and I have to sort of taken that into account. But early in his career, he did a lot of low budget horror movies. Brain Dead, aka Dead Alive. Obviously we've already kind of mentioned Meet the Feebles, which is kind of, I guess you would call it a horror film. And he did another one as well. This first film I can't remember the bloody name of it now, but there you go. But he's done like some fun kind of like super kind of gory movies. Number 2 is Ted Nicolai. So there you want a lesser known one. There you go, Ted Nicolai. And he did a lot of movies that were for Full Moon Productions. He did a lot of the kind of the subspecies movies, and there's just generally a lot of movies of his that he did that I actually kind of quite like. Vampire Journals is a particular kind of favourite of mine. So Ted Nicolai is on the list. And then number 1 I would say is Sam Raimi. Again, he's now directing the new Doctor Strange movie. So maybe people will think of him more about superheroes now, because he did Spider-Man. But obviously he did the Evil Dead movies, and I love the first 2. I'm okay with the 3rd one. But he's done some other kind of bits and pieces as well that I kind of enjoyed. So that is my top 3 lists. What did you think? Any answers there that surprised you? I'd be curious to hear. And again, if anyone wants to do a kind of a video like this, I'd be curious to see what your top 3. And I will ask you a top 3 of something. Thanks for watching. Look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.